half a day, and welcome to Coffee with the Candidates. This series was created to educate and inform Guam's voting population on the positions candidates running for office take on some of the island's most controversial topics. It's another round of questions and answers this time with 2 of 3 congressional delegate candidates. Current Guam Congresswoman Madeleine Bordallo running under the Democrat side of the ballot, and former public auditor for Guam running under the Republican Party, Doris Flores Brooks.
Welcome to another episode of Coffee with the Candidates. I'm Phil Leongaro with News Talk K57, and today I'm joined with our candidate from the Republican Party for our lone non-voting delegate seat in the House of Representatives, Hafadeta Doris Flores Brooks.
Have a day, Phil.
And thank you very much for joining us today.
Well, thank you for the invitation. I'm glad to be here.
So I guess maybe where I would like to start is Congresswoman Madeleine Bordallo has been our delegate for, I think it's now she's going into her 8th term. What makes this year the right year to join the race, and what do you bring as a candidate that you think you can finally unseat our incumbent Congresswoman?
Well, thank you for that question, and a lot of people have been asking me that question. You know, the people of Guam know me as the public auditor for nearly 18 years, and over those time I have seen the effect of many of the programs, the unfunded mandates and the underfunded mandates of the federal government. While we do receive a lot of good benefits from the federal government, there are a number of unfunded mandates. Let me give you an example.
Okay.
Compact Aid. The Earned Income Tax Credit. Did you know, for example, that we're getting reimbursed for the child tax credit, but yet we're not being reimbursed for the Earned Income Tax Credit? And that program, while it's a good program for our people, has grown exponentially. We're now paying over $50 million in Earned Income Tax Credit. So why now, especially with the drop in the Trump tax cuts, this is why we need to get reimbursed, because if they can pay us for the child tax credit, why not lobby and get legislation to do and be reimbursed for the Earned Income Tax Credit? Then of course you're hearing about the problem with the hospital. Mm-hmm. The hospital is still being paid at 1990 Medicare rates, and this is nearly 20 plus years old. So these are just some of the unfunded mandates and underfunded mandates that need to be addressed. And another area, for example, is the H-2B visa. I want to see the success that Congressman Khalili Sablan had, for example, with the extension, the 10-year extension of the temporary visa program here. H-2B visa challenge started 3 years ago, and finally, immigration, CIS, finally has approved projects inside the fence, but not projects outside the fence. And as you can see, our private construction has come to a grinding halt. Affordable housing will no longer be affordable. Many projects to help spur economic development, like hotel expansions or new hotels, are put on hold because they can't get the labor, and it's driving up the cost of construction. So these are just some of the programs that I want to work on, because I can no longer stand still and watch it anymore. I want to take action.
I think clearly a lot of those serve to demonstrate how the federal government maybe has forgotten about Guam, and how maybe different representation might put us on an even playing field with the states, for instance. But I wonder if you could give some examples of what is the federal government doing, what is the U.S. Congress doing right for this island, and what would you fight to preserve if elected to the House?
Guam gets a lot of benefits in the totality of the different federal programs for us, like the Section 30 money, like education programs, like agricultural programs, SNAP as an example, like Medicare programs, HHS, we get over $100 million in there, 70 million of which is helping for Medicare and Medicaid type programs. So in the totality of things, there are a number of programs that have been beneficial to Guam. But also, there are, as I mentioned, those previously have been underfunded and unfunded. Okay, and again, you know, Compact Aid, EITC, Medicare rebasing, to name a few, and of course the H-2B visa, just to name a few again.
I want to ask about the contrast in experience versus being a member of the ruling party in DC right now. Do you think that electing a Republican to the U.S. House from Guam would bode better for our island than having a Democrat minority member, although she is a senior member, a ranking member in her subcommittee?
Definitely. I mean, to be a Republican in a Republican-controlled Congress, House and Senate, and to have a Republican president, I think bodes well for Guam. And that's why I'm running. You know, when Madeleine was delegate, she also had Barack Obama during that time, and we didn't see an increase in federal programs for Guam. So now, with both houses, the Congress as well as the administration, I'm hoping to leverage that connection to be on appropriate committees that will help Guam, and to leverage that connection with the Republican National Committee and the Republican-controlled Congress. But also, we need to work on both sides of the aisle, not just one side, but we need to work on both sides of the aisle, because many of the programs we have are bipartisan, and we want to ensure that I reach out. I mean, if Congressman Khalili Sablan, as I mentioned, can get that program, and he's a Democrat through a Republican Congress, how much more a Republican delegate in a Republican Congress?
No matter who gets elected in November, there's certainly going to be big ticket items on the plate of our non-voting delegate. You mind if I ask you about a few?
Sure.
First, the military buildup. Can I just ask your general stance on the buildup, and maybe if there is a contrasting view that you have with the Congresswoman, what would that be?
I am for the military buildup. The military the second industry on Guam is federal programs and military expenditures. You know, it's the Section 30 monies that we get that. And if that's increased because of more military, that's going to bode well for Guam. So I do want to see that. But as the same token, we need to the military needs to show respect for our areas. You know, as a lot of people don't remember this, but as a freshman senator, when the Nico Hotel was being built, I actually filed a lawsuit on the Nico because they did find some artifacts there, and we halted the construction so that with reverence we relocated those artifacts. And as you know, there's a nice little park there. Well, that was one of the projects that I did as a freshman senator. And likewise, we want to say the same thing that the military does to whatever artifacts are found, that they're put with reverence and respect for a place for the people of Guam to go there. But I am for the military buildup because that's going to bring opportunities for our people, more jobs, more employment for Guam.
The military has promised in the programmatic agreement to a net negative land, I guess, inventory at the end of the buildup. Basically, when all is said and done, they will have less acres of land than they did when they started the buildup. How are you going to hold them to that promise?
Well, one of the things to do, and I'm glad you asked that question, is for the federal government and GovGuam to work together to identify parcels of land. There's one area that I've been wondering about for a long time because I bike a lot, the USO, right there. That property has been vacant for a number of years now. That would be, to me, that would be a property ripe to go back to GovGuam, whether it be under Department of Parks and Recreation or the Mayor of Petey to have control of that, because that's a lovely piece of property. It's not being used. Why not let the people of Guam have access to that property? So that's one area. But again, GovGuam needs to help identify and figure out how many acres do we have to make sure that at the end of the day there is less acreage, and hold them accountable to that. And as the next delegate, I will make sure that we do that.
Self-determination. There's sort of a cynical view out there that no matter what happens in a plebiscite, Congress can take the results and say, thank you very much, Guam, that was very cute and nice. You're going to continue as a territory. How would you ensure that your fellow Democrats and Republicans in both houses of Congress can respect the wishes of the people of Guam as we move forward in our decolonization?
Well, regardless of the outcome of the plebiscite, whether it be for free association, independence, or statehood. And by the way, I'm wondering why only just statehood? Just because the UN says it's 3? But anyway, because I'm really more for closer affiliation rather than statehood, okay? But regardless of what the outcome is, the role of the delegate is to bring the voice of the people of Guam to the Congress, not just to the Congress, but also to the administration, so they're made fully aware of what are the wishes of the people of Guam. The role of the delegate is to be the voice of Guam in Washington, not Washington's voice in Guam. Okay, so that my role is to make sure that the people in Congress and the administration know what the people of Guam advocate.
And I guess to help us wrap up, how do you think your time as public auditor will give you an advantage in the U.S. Congress? Because that is the job, this public service you have undertaken for the better part of 2 decades.
Well, as I mentioned, I'm familiar with the programs. I can better articulate what are Guam's challenges. I know, for example, Jean Dodaro, the Comptroller General of GAO, the Government Accountability Office. I know certain key people in the Department of Interior Office of Insular Affairs. So not only being a Republican in a Republican administration, in a Republican-controlled Congress, but to leverage the relationships that I have built up as public auditor, but also to articulate, like the challenge that we have right now with the hospital. They have been telling that same story over and over again. The governor had requested an audit be done by GAO, had requested of Madeleine 2 years ago. That request has yet to be answered. I will use my relationship with Jean Dodaro to ask him to sit down with them. These are their challenges, but leverage those relationships, leverage who I know, and work together. Yes, I'm going to be a freshman, but hey, you got to start someplace.
Doris Flores Brooks is the lone Republican candidate for Guam's lone seat in the U.S. House of Representatives. Thank you very much for the time, and we will be back with more Coffee with the Candidates after this.
Thank you, Phil. I really appreciated this.
Hafa and welcome back to Coffee with the Candidates. I'm your host, Janella Carrera, and joining us in this segment of this episode of CWTC is incumbent Congresswoman Madeleine Bordallo. Thank you so much for joining us on Coffee with the Candidates.
Well, thank you, Janella, and I want to thank SMG for having me.
Of course. So we're going to start off with some easy questions, some icebreaker questions, get to know a little bit more about you, your fun side. Do you have Netflix or Hulu? Do you watch any of those shows there?
Well, the 2 shows, well, let me put it this way. When I'm in Washington, when I'm not at work and I'm at home, I normally watch all the national News, yes, CNN and all of them. I flip around. And then, of course, I love to watch Turner Classic Movies.
Oh.
Yeah, I have that.
I love that.
And I do. And they're old movies, but I love them. And they're wonderful. You're wonderful actresses and actors that I remember and my mother used to tell me about.
I see. What about at Fiesta? You know, I'm sure you've had your fair share of fiestas. What kind of food would we see on your plate?
Well, Kelloggin is one of my favorites, but I like all the Kelloggins except shrimp is my favorite.
Oh.
Oh, okay. Yes, I will walk a mile to have some shrimp Kelloggin. But you know, on Guam, I keep very close in touch with the Guam Society of America there. I go to all their meetings,
out
and
in
their events. They're in the area of Maryland, Virginia, and Washington, D.C. It's one of the oldest organized Chamorro clubs. And then comes the Sons and Daughters in San Diego. So I go to all their events, and of course, every time you go, whether it's a meeting or whatever, there's Guam food.
Right.
And we just recently had the laying of the wreath, And I invited Survivor,
Yes.
Mrs. Scambaluri, Irene Scambaluri, and it was such an emotional event. It was beautiful. A lot of people from the GSA were there, and a lot of military officials. And then we had a Chamorro brunch at my office afterwards, and there were about maybe 200-300 people.
Wow.
Oh yeah, we served, you know.
Getting to try
I told them when I
food?
spoke to them, I said, Chamorro brunch is a lot different than any other kind of a brunch.
Right.
So it included everything.
I actually remember back in Las Vegas when I was living there, this was maybe 10, 12 years ago.
Right.
I went to a Chamorro gathering for July 24th for Liberation, and you were there.
I was there, I remember. And you know, just recently, JFK had a mega reunion.
Wow.
And there were over 800 people there. And it was a sit-down affair at a hotel, and I was a keynote speaker. And what was funny about it was, I'm a graduate of GW, so I had to start out by saying, I'm a gecko, but I love you Islanders too.
Right.
So anyway, it was beautiful. And again, we had Chamorro food, and it was wonderful.
Wow, well that sounds like a really fun event. What about music? What's your taste in music?
Music, well, I have to say that when I'm out of the office, of course I watch TV, I watch the proceedings of the House while I'm there. We all have televisions in our offices. But when anyone takes me home or takes me to any event, Chamorro music.
Wow.
And yeah, I love Chamorro music. And right now I'm being driven by one of the staffers here. Chamorro music.
Is on what?
Because it brings back, you know, memories, and I'm always so happy to come back to Guam. Although I love my job in Washington, but it's just that, you know, we're so far away, and I just miss it.
Yeah.
I was brought up here. I was 13 years old when I came to Guam.
Well, is there a particular song that you love?
No, just anything.
Just anything.
Oh yeah, whatever. Whatever the songs. And of course I remember J.D. Crutch and Johnny Sablon and all of those, you know, but whatever the music is, as long as it's from home.
Okay, well, I like getting to know you. I like this segment, but we have to turn it over to a little bit of the more, just a little harder questions. I'm sure nothing that you're not used to. You've been in Congress for what, 12, 14?
16 years.
16 years, wow. Wow, that is amazing. You know, you've seen it all. You've been there for a long time. If you are reelected, what would you focus on, you know, in your, turning into your 16th or 17th year in Congress?
This would be, if I win this election, it would be 18
years.
Yes, it's a 2-year term. Well, you know, one thing I learned when I first went to Congress was the fact that they didn't know much about Guam. They didn't know me for anything. You know, I had to make myself known. And that at first when I was there, they thought I was from Guatemala. So there's a lot of that educating to do. And my predecessors were all very good at it too, but you know, then they're gone and I start out, and when I started out, I had to start out as a freshman. I mean, a freshman. And all you do is get a couple of committees that you're appointed to, but you don't have any standing. So I served as chairman in natural resources after a couple of 3 terms. And I served as the chairman of the Committee on Fisheries, Wildlife, Oceans, and Insular Affairs. I'm still on that committee. But then I went also to, I think that all my predecessors were on a military defense committee. So I'm now serving as a ranking member of Readiness, which is the most important, well actually it deals with, it's not any more important, but it deals with more money and funding than any other committee. And I think in order to move up the ranks, you have to be I'm very bipartisan. I don't really label anybody when I meet them. Are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? I like them all. And I know that in order to get things for Guam and the territories, and I am the dean now of the territories, except for DC. She has served many more years than I have. But I always, whenever I legislate, introduce bills, I invite all the territories to participate with me.
If reelected, how would you ensure that the federal government would pay attention to the issues of our island, the key issues like, I know you're currently working on Compact Impact, you got that passed, but other issues like our political status, military buildup, how would you ensure that they pay attention, close attention?
Well, I think most important is I have somebody in my office now, actually a couple of people, that are monitoring every piece of legislation that's introduced into the U.S. Congress. You have to be very, very careful. It's not a matter of they're trying to, it's just they're not used to the territories. It's states, states, states. So this person is watching every piece of legislation, and anytime he sees that the territories are not mentioned or that we're not given the same funding, for example, the Land and Sea the Land and Sea Conservation Act included Guam and the territories, but they gave us the same funding that they did states, divided 5 ways. So we get so much less. He discovered that. So these are the things that you have to monitor very carefully to see that we deserve everything that any other state deserves.
Now, in terms of political status, if Guam were given a chance to vote in a plebiscite, which would you support, free association, independence, or statehood?
Well, you know very well, as a politician, and I am running, and of course, I don't take sides. And I have gone to their meetings down at the Laddie Park. I went to one, and it was very interesting. They all stood up and reasoned why they want this particular status for Guam and why it's important. And I did introduce during one of the Insular Affairs Committee, Interior, takes care of the islands. Right. And so I found $300,000 in education money, which they're using now.
Oh, great.
So I spoke to them and I said, I support, and I'm very interested in everything you said here tonight, but whoever wins in this plebiscite, will you support the others? Because we have to go to Washington in one voice. And so they all agreed. They agreed to that they would support the winner. And if I am reelected, I would be the messenger to go to Washington, and I would support it. Whatever it is, whatever the people decide upon in this plebiscite, I will support.
That's actually what I was going to ask you. Next is if we do vote, whatever we vote for, how would you ensure that Congress acts on it? It would be a very difficult task to do that. Well,
I think Congress looks at it. Any bill that I represent, I introduce, they always ask me, do the people want this back home? I mean, they're not going to go forward with a bill that they're going to find that the people will object to. So it's important that everything that goes before Congress is sanctioned by the people of Guam.
You've been in Congress for 16, going on 18 if reelected. What would you say in those last 16 years in office was probably your most critical piece of legislation or something that you think would honor your legislacy?
Well, first of all, from the very beginning, Congressman Wampat, General Blas, and then, of course, Dr. Underwood, all supported the war claims. And they were never successful, and I tried for many years also and was not successful until I finally got it through. I had to make some adjustments because the Senate absolutely refused to support, and if the Senate doesn't support the House side, it won't go. So to me, that is the most important. And we finally have come to the point where it's now before the Federal Commission. They're looking at it. And I think I recently heard that they had a meeting. They took one, and we have over 3,000.
Wow.
And they took one of the samples, looked at it, and of course then they meet on it and they begin to adjudicate them. I don't know what the time frame will be, but after they get through with it, then it has to go to appropriations. And appropriations is going to take some time too. But it's there, it's law, and we'll soon see the fruits of that adventure. But to me, that was a very big, important person. And of course, the status of our island is very important. Everybody has fought for that for years. And we've got to be treated as U.S. citizens like everybody else.
Yes, yeah, I know you just introduced a bill recently to give us voting rights as well.
That's right. And just before I came here, Yeah. I introduced the bill to allow us to vote for president and vice president.
Right.
That's one start. You know, you have to get your foot in. You can't give it all at one time, or they may object.
Right.
But I think this has a chance, because I've talked to some of my colleagues, and they can't believe it. They said, "You mean you don't?" They don't still know.
Wow.
Some of them,
wow.
you know, that we don't vote, and it's very disparaging.
Yeah. Well, we're all out of time, so I just want to say thank you so much for joining us on this episode of Coffee with the Candidates, and we wish you the best of luck on your campaign.
Well, thank you, Janelle. It was an honor to be here, and I enjoyed visiting with you.
Absolutely. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
All right, well, that was Congresswoman Madeleine Bordallo. Thank you so much for joining us here in Coffee with the Candidates. Until next time.